babes, if you ever needed proof that chaos literally follows us everywhere, today delivered.
Oh, it delivered. The universe woke up this morning, looked at the entire medical ethics board, and it chose absolute violence.
Literally chose violence.
Yeah, we are looking at files today that show the highest caliber of, institutional hubris. And honestly, we just have to sit back, analyze the absolute wreckage, and just let it happen.
We truly do. But Snark Squad, we love you. Thank you so much for being here, for riding this incredibly chaotic, honestly psychologically damaging wave with us.
Yeah, thank you for enabling our delusions.
Exactly. And if you're new here, hey, hello, welcome. Go ahead and hit subscribe right now because, babes, we are your people. You have officially found your safe space for spiraling.
It is genuinely the only place on the internet where we meticulously overanalyze fictional trauma and weaponized psychology while completely ignoring our own mundane adult problems. It's called balance.
It is the pinnacle of balance.
Wow.
And speaking of balance, I need everyone to visualize what is sitting on the desk between us right now.
Oh boy, here we go.
Now, let me set the scene. We've got the iced Aperol spritzes back on deck, and they are giving life. I am looking at this glass, and it is a piece of art.
It's an adult soda.
It's not. Just picture the vibrant neon orange color, right? That perfect layer of condensation dripping down the side of the glass, the distinct clinking of the ice cubes.
Very poetic.
And the absolute life-giving, soul-resurrecting feeling of that very first sip after a long week. It is everything.
I mean, I'll let you have your moment, but I'm standing my ground on this.
Yeah.
It is a heavily romanticized, slightly bitter soda.
Excuse me, it is the official drink of the summer. I am claiming it right now. The Aperol Spritz is timeless, it's chaotic, and it absolutely screams Snarkside summer. It is the aesthetic we deserve.
I'm going to push back on that. Strong.
What is wrong with joy?
Nothing is wrong with joy, but I'll tell you why a spritz doesn't work. Given the absolute procedural nightmare chaos we consume on a weekly basis, a spritz is entirely too weak. It's too joyful.
Okay, well,
Let me finish. A true Snarkside summer drink needs to reflect the gravity of the psychological warfare we are decoding. We are dealing with serial killers who carve hostages, government shadow conspiracies, toxic emotional manipulation.
okay, that got dark really fast.
But it's true. We need tequila. Or a very smoky mezcal.
Right.
Something that actually burns a little bit going down, just to remind us we're alive while we watch people make catastrophic choices.
Okay, valid. I hear you. The media we consume does induce a physiological need for hard liquor. I won't deny that at all.
Thank you.
But the Aperol is about the delusion. It's about pretending we are sitting on a sun-drenched patio in Italy, living our best, unbothered lives, while we are actually sitting in a studio screaming about the deep state weaponization of sociopaths. It's the duality of man.
The delusion is definitely on brand for our demographic, I'll give you that.
Right, thank you. Okay, babes, before we get into the absolute madness of this week's television chaos, we need to respond to the Snark Squad. The DMs have been completely wild.
The YouTube comments are actually popping off this week.
They really are, and we need to address the people.
Let's open the vault.
Yeah.
What do the people want to know before we get into the heavy stuff?
First comment. Can you open the YouTube comments? Okay, yes, babes, absolutely, we hear you.
It is a massive work in progress.
It really is. We are trying to figure out the back end of the channel without accidentally deleting the entire internet. Be real and transparent with yourselves here. We are technically challenged.
Highly challenged.
Yeah.
But emotionally available. We can reverse engineer the dissociative trauma of a ventriloquist serial killer, but you ask us to toggle an administrative setting on a video platform and our prefrontal cortex is completely shut down.
Literally just a dial tone in our brains.
It's happening. Just give us a minute to consult like a teenager to help us fix it.
The truth hurts, but it sets us free. Okay, comment number 2. Why do you talk so scripted? Oh my gosh, the audacity.
I love this one.
Yeah.
I genuinely love it because it assumes a level of pre-planning that we simply do not possess.
Zero planning. We have answered this before, but I will say it again for the new babes in the back. We are professionals. This is literally just how we talk.
Yeah, we are best friends who spend entirely too much time together.
Exactly. We consume the exact same toxic media, we read the same clinical psychology papers for fun, and our brains have just synced up into one terrifying, chaotic hive mind.
Right. If you think this recording is scripted, you should witness us trying to decide where to order takeout on a random Tuesday.
Oh my God, the sushi debate of last week.
It is a grueling 45-minute monologue of intersecting thoughts, risk assessments, and existential dread. There is no script. There is only the spiral.
Only the spiral, which leads perfectly into comment 3. Why do you cut each other off?
I mean, we fully admit to it. Guilty as charged.
We are so guilty. But babes, you have to understand the mechanics of what is happening in the room right now. It's the excitement. It's the sheer, unadulterated passion of the narratives we are unpacking.
It's a lack of impulse control, is what it is.
Well, yeah. When a fictional government agency makes a terrible, medically unethical decision, I cannot politely wait my turn to speak. I just can't. I have to physically expel the thought from my body before my nervous system combusts.
It's a flaw. We are working on it. But when the plot twists are this psychologically dense, polite dinner party conversation goes completely out the window. We're in the analytical trenches together.
We really are. Okay, comment 4, which I absolutely adore. Are you actually drinking every episode?
I mean, look at the condensation on the glasses. Listen to the ice. Do we look like we have the surplus energy required to fake a cocktail for an hour?
No, absolutely not. Yes, babes, we are actually drinking. It's part of the process. It is the necessary lubrication for the critical analysis.
It's how we survive the procedural trauma without taking it home with us. It's purely medicinal at this point.
Purely medicinal. A designated buffer between our actual careers and this studio. And the last comment for today, which always makes me laugh so hard. Are you really dentists, or is that a bit?
It sounds like a bit. I totally get it.
It does.
If I were a casual listener tuning in to hear two people meticulously deconstruct the pharmacology of an experimental brain receptor drug, I would also assume dentist was a highly specific, absurd comedy bit.
But it's not. Confirming the absolute reality for you all right now, we are real, licensed, practicing healthcare professionals living a completely unhinged double life as podcast hosts.
Hannah Montana could literally never handle this schedule.
Never. By day, we are diagnosing periodontal disease, fixing cavities, and politely knowing that you are lying to us about your flossing habits.
We know, by the way, the gums never lie. They literally scream the truth.
They scream it, and then by night, we are analyzing the toxic dynamics of institutional corruption and shadow government conspiracies. It's a very specific niche.
It grounds us, really, which is actually why today has been such a chaotic but incredibly productive Friday.
It has been so productive. Like, let's ground this recording for a second. We actually got so much done today before we hit the studio.
We did. We survived the clinical work week, finished up a full schedule of procedures, navigated the minefield of healthcare administration, and actually functioned as contributing members of society.
And then doing all the random adult errands. Going to the gym, fighting for a parking spot at Trader Joe's, picking up the dry cleaning.
The Trader Joe's parking lot is a battlefield.
It's a literal warfare. Just those tiny, miserable adult tasks that trick you into feeling like your life is perfectly optimized when you finally sit down. We are celebrating the small wins, babes.
And the biggest win is that we are finally here, drinks in hand, ready to unleash all the analytical thoughts we've been compartmentalizing since we clocked out.
Yes. Oh, wait, one more lived-in moment for the babes before we launch into the heavy stuff. If you hear meowing in the background today, you are not crazy.
You're not hallucinating a phantom frequency.
No, my brilliant co-host actually brought her cat, Peppercorn, to the studio today.
Peppercorn is currently sitting on a stack of my psychological profiling notes, judging us from the corner.
He is officially the Snark Squad cat. He has very strong, intuitive opinions about serialized television and human behavior. So if he chimes in mid-recording, just know he is actively adding to the discourse. We respect his voice.
He's a critical thinker. We love that for him.
Okay, babes, this is huge. I need to build the hype right now because we have officially caught up. We have watched the latest episodes of The Hunting Party.
Specifically, Season 2, Episode 11, and Season 2, Episode 12.
Which is a massive milestone for us.
It is, because it means we are perfectly positioned to recap and analyze the upcoming finale in real time with the Snark Squad. No more lagging behind the cultural zeitgeist.
Yes. We are in the current timeline experiencing the psychological trauma exactly when everyone else is. I'm practically vibrating with energy. The tension, the reveals, the absolute audacity of the institutional corruption, it is overwhelming.
So grab your drinks, hold on to your sanity, and let's unpack this.
Okay, babes, let's get into the chaos.
Let's do it. We are starting with the psychological labyrinth of Episode 11, Dylan Myles.
Babes, when I tell you my jaw literally detached from my skull in the first 5 minutes. If you ever needed proof that casting directors are the unsung absolute geniuses of the entertainment industry, this is it.
It was a stroke of brilliance.
Dylan Myles is played by Kevin McHale. Artie from Glee? Artie is a serial killer.
The whiplash of seeing the sweet, optimistic, wheelchair-bound kid from McKinley High transform into a cold, precise, deeply disturbed murderer who uses ventriloquist dummies to channel his homicidal rage. It was a staggering transition to process.
I completely spiraled. I was looking at my notes, looking at the screen, and I just started yelling. One of the babes in the Snark Squad comments actually said it took him about 20 minutes to realize, wait, that's Artie?
It plays on our preconceived notions of innocence perfectly.
Exactly. I recognized him instantly, and honestly, it just made the entire aesthetic so much creepier. Because he goes from being the sweet, visibly terrified, sweating guy bombing horribly on a comedy stage to just flipping a switch into extreme, unrestricted tactical violence.
But we need to look past the shock value of the casting and examine the mechanism of his pathology. What's fascinating here is the psychological profile the narrative built for him.
Right.
He isn't a disorganized killer acting on random impulses. He's hyper-organized. He's targeting very specific demographics, people who bullied him and people who heckled his comedy act. And if we look at the clinical history provided, it makes horrifying textbook sense.
Oh, the mutism.
Yes, he was completely mute until he was 10 years old. Elective mutism. He quite literally did not have a voice in his formative years.
Okay, but stop. I need you to explain this to me because I get the surface level trauma of not speaking. But how does a ventriloquist dummy actually function as a psychological shield for murder?
It's complex.
Because to me, it's just creepy painted wood.
Ugh.
How does his brain legitimately disconnect from his own actions to the point where he can kill without hesitation just because a doll is in his hand?
It's a profound dissociative mechanism. Think about the developmental stages of a child. When a child lacks the vocal cords or the psychological safety to exert their own agency, they have to put that agency somewhere else.
Okay, so they project it.
Exactly. They externalize the primal emotional part of the psyche. Dylan transferred his entire ego, his rage, his needs, into his sister's dolls. That became his only bridge to the external world.
Oh, wow.
So neurologically speaking, when he holds that dummy, he isn't playing a character. His brain is shifting into an entirely separate cognitive pathway where the dummy is the entity with the power and Dylan is just the passive vessel.
Wow, okay, that makes it so much darker because when he finally gets on stage as an adult to try and use his own voice, his actual biological voice, and people mock him, they yell at him to get off the stage.
It triggers a massive, violent regression. The adult, socialized Dylan shatters, and the traumatized, voiceless child takes over. But the child is now armed.
And he doesn't just kill these hecklers. Look at his post-mortem behavior. He dumped their bodies in highly public, humiliating ways.
He wants them to suffer the exact same public indignity and stripping of agency that he felt on that stage. It's incredibly personal vengeance wrapped in a dissociative disorder.
This is exactly why I needed to unpack this, because the therapy aspect, if we can even call it that, is where I absolutely lost my mind.
Oh, the medical malpractice.
The pit, the super secret, black site, totally unethical prison. They gave him therapy, but they didn't actually help him. The episode says they gave him 67 sessions of empty chair therapy, and I need to know why that is considered a medical intervention.
Right. Empty chair therapy is a real technique, usually rooted in Gestalt therapy. The idea is that you place an empty chair in front of the patient and you ask them to imagine someone sitting there, maybe an abusive parent or a part of themselves they hate, and you have them speak to the chair to process unresolved conflict.
But Dylan refused to speak to the actual therapist.
Exactly. So the pit doctors leaned into his pathology instead of treating it. They allowed him to project his conflicts onto the empty chair, which for him meant projecting entirely onto his dummies. He named them Peter and Debbie.
So they just let him do his puppet show in prison.
Pretty much. Here is the critical failure of the pit. In actual Gestalt therapy, the therapist acts as a guide to eventually break down the projection and integrate those feelings back into the patient's core self. The pit doctors didn't do that.
They just let him talk to the wood.
They let him project indefinitely. They officially, medically validated his delusion. They basically told his brain, yes, your dissociative split is a perfectly acceptable way to exist. They didn't dismantle his coping mechanism, they fortified it.
It is the ultimate failure of institutional psychology. It's like handing a pyromaniac a blowtorch and telling them it's a nightlight. They took a broken, traumatized man and basically sharpened his edges. They armed a killer with a much scarier, federally approved coping mechanism. And we see the catastrophic result of that when the pit blows up and he loses those specific dummies in the blast. He completely unravels because they never taught him how to exist without them.
His safety net was incinerated.
Yeah.
Which inevitably leads us to the bloody puppet workshop. He has to rebuild his externalized ego.
He breaks into Nicholas Fletcher's shop. Fletcher is the artisan, the puppet maker who originally designed the dolls that somehow ended up in the pit with Dylan. And Dylan absolutely destroys the place.
He beats Fletcher so severely he puts him in a coma just to steal his ledger.
Because he doesn't just want any dummies to replace Peter and Debbie. He needs the exact replicas. His obsessive-compulsive need for control demands absolute perfection. And that ledger is the holy grail because it contains the names of the real living people that Fletcher used as models for the dolls.
The specific detail.
It freaked me out on a cellular level. The fact that these creepy, unsettling, uncanny valley dummies were modeled after real walking around human beings, and Dylan is hunting them down. Poor Jane Hines. We have to talk about Jane Hines.
A completely innocent casualty of an artisan's side hustle.
She was just a regular woman who got paid $500 by Fletcher to sit in a chair and let him use her facial structure to carve Debbie. And years later, she gets shot dead in her own home just because her face inspired the doll.
It is so tragically random for her.
She had no idea why this man was in her house. But to Dylan, she isn't a human being named Jane. She is Debbie.
That is the crux of objectification. And if we connect this to the mechanism of his obsession with control, look at how he rebuilds the Peter doll. He doesn't just find a photograph and carve it in a quiet workshop. He literally breaks into a house, takes a man hostage, and uses that terrified living human being as a live model to carve a new Peter doll.
Sitting right in front of him, forcing the hostage to sit perfectly still under the threat of death while he whittles wood.
I want to analyze why he does that. Why not just use a photo? Because the act of holding a human hostage and forcing them to be completely still, completely mute, and completely subservient to his creative process is the ultimate exertion of control.
Oh, that makes sense.
He is taking a living human with agency and reducing them to a still life object. It is exactly what he felt the hecklers did to him, reducing him to a joke, stripping his humanity. He is obsessively making sure every single scar, every tiny detail in the wood matches the original. And it's terrifying because, the second he finishes that final sanding of the doll, the hostage is no longer necessary.
The human being becomes obsolete. The doll is the only thing that holds value to him. It is so chilling, it makes my skin crawl.
You're dark.
But okay, while Dylan is out here doing arts and crafts from hell, we finally get a massive shift in the procedural dynamic. We get action from the command center. Morales, Peck, and Ben Jones go out into the field to check on Keith Jones, who is the real-life inspiration for the Peter doll.
Which is a huge operational shift. We haven't seen Morales out in the field since, season 1? It's been a significant amount of time since she wasn't behind a monitor.
Way too long. I was swooning over the tension of it all. Morales finally gets out of the command center. She's taking charge. She's holding her weapon. They breach the house, and immediately the dread sets in. They find Keith Jones dead. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And then, bam, complete chaos. Dylan ambushes them in the kitchen.
Tactically, it was a disaster. They let their guard down. They assumed the perimeter was clear. They got sloppy, and they walked right into a fatal funnel in a confined kitchen space.
But the romance of it all. I'm sorry, I have to be emotionally compromised for a second. A high-stakes shootout in the kitchen, gunfire everywhere, and Jonathan Peck literally throws himself in front of Morales and takes a bullet for her. I was screaming at my screen.
I know you love the romantic heroism, the grand gesture.
A man taking a bullet for you. In this economy, it was peak romantic drama, and I was entirely here for it.
But I need to bring the tactical analysis and the heavy sarcasm here for a second. Let's really look at Jonathan Peck in that scene. Let's strip away the romance and look at the mechanics.
Oh, don't ruin this beautiful moment for me.
I absolutely have to ruin it. Because we need to ask, how ridiculously convenient was it that he stepped into the line of fire at that exact microsecond? But more importantly, let's look at his tactical awareness. This guy's supposed to be a desk jockey. He's an analyst. He looks at spreadsheets and satellite feeds.
Yeah.
but the way he carried his weapon,
Mm.
the way he moved through that fatal funnel in the house, the way he engaged in a close-quarters kitchen shootout.
Wait, but isn't it possible that adrenaline just took over? Like, those stories of mothers lifting a burning car off their baby? Couldn't this just be the nerd in a shootout version of hysterical strength because he loves Morales?
That's a great question, but no. Adrenaline gives you gross motor strength. It does not give you fine motor tactical precision. You do not default to SWAT-level room-clearing techniques, perfectly pieing a corner and maintaining perfect weapon retention just because you're pumped full of adrenaline.
Mhm.
In a crisis, you don't rise to the occasion. You default to your level of training. And Peck's default was highly trained, elite-level combat maneuvering. His energy was profoundly suspicious for a guy who supposedly gets winded walking up a flight of stairs.
Okay, you're not wrong. When you lay it out like that, it completely changes the lens of that scene. And we will definitely circle back to Peck's highly suspicious combat training, because the ending of this episode connects that thread in a devastating way. But before we get there, we have to talk about the Jeff Dunham cameo.
Pure casting brilliance. It was the only logical, meta way to do an episode about a ventriloquist serial killer.
I laughed out loud. The sheer shade of the writers casting Jeff Dunham just to get kidnapped, thrown in the trunk of a car, and beg for his life while his own dummies mock him. It was high art.
It really was.
And the backstory they gave him. Jeff Miller Dunham's character started out in the exact same small, dingy comedy club in Boulder as Dylan. But while the audience absolutely hated Dylan, they adored Jeff. And the sickening twist is that Jeff got famous using a dummy named Mr. Bonkers that directly plagiarized and mocked Dylan's act.
It is the ultimate theft of intellectual property, layered on top of deep personal humiliation. Dylan's trauma was literally commodified and turned into a stadium tour by another man. And Jeff's excuse, when Dylan inevitably breaks into his house and confronts him, "I thought you were dead."
So weak.
That is a remarkably weak defense for stealing someone's entire identity and turning it into a streaming special. You don't just absorb a man's trauma because you haven't seen him at an open mic in a while.
Energy completely off for Jeff Miller. You don't steal an act, assume a man is dead without doing a basic Google search, and then cry when he shows up in your living room with a loaded gun and a deeply cursed wooden dummy to reclaim his intellectual property. Take some accountability, Jeff.
Which brings us to the psychological climax at the comedy club. Dylan creates this new grotesque dummy called Dead Jeff, and he drags the real beaten, bloody Jeff onto the actual stage where it all started.
So twisted.
He wants the ultimate heckler revenge. He wants the audience, in this case the cops, to laugh at Jeff the way they laughed at him. He wants to externalize the humiliation.
It was incredibly dark. But Beck's showing up with Hassani just in the nick of time was a masterclass in profiling. Bex doesn't try to outshoot him. She knows she can't win a tactical firefight with a man who has nothing to lose. So she outthinks him. She uses brilliant reverse psychology.
Let's break down the mechanics of what Bex actually does there, because it's a textbook hostage negotiation pivot. She analyzes his core drive. She realizes his core drive isn't just murder. Murder is just the vehicle. His core drive is humiliation and dominance, so she reframes the win condition for him.
Yes. She convinces Dylan that pulling the trigger and killing Jeff is actually a release. It ends Jeff's suffering. It's too easy.
Exactly. She pitches him a different narrative. She tells him that letting Jeff live is the actual punishment. Letting Jeff survive with the psychological trauma of being broken, bleeding, and publicly humiliated on his own stage, knowing he is a fraud. That is a lifelong sentence. She gives Dylan a revenge framework that is theoretically worse than death, and it satisfies his pathological need for dominance. It completely de-escalates the immediate physical threat.
So good. It is so satisfying to watch a profiler actually profile successfully. But babes, here is where it gets really interesting. We have to pivot to the twin deceptions happening in the background of this episode. We have to talk about the toxic snooping.
My absolute favorite kind of procedural snooping.
Same. So Shane sets up this elaborate decoy dinner with his biological mother, the sociopathic Colonel Lazarus. He's sitting across from her at a restaurant, playing the dutiful, curious son, pretending to build a genuine relationship. Meanwhile, Bex and Hassani are illegally breaking into Lazarus's apartment to search for hard evidence connecting her to the Noah Cyrus convoy hit.
It's incredibly tense, but we have to look at the sheer hubris of the team here. It is completely absurd to think a brilliant, sociopathic supervillain like Lazarus wouldn't have an intricately layered security system or hidden counter-surveillance in her primary residence. The team's arrogance to just walk in there with flashlights, assuming they are outsmarting a shadow government operative, is astounding.
I know, right? Like, check for a Ring doorbell at the bare minimum, look for a laser grid. But while that high-stakes breaking and entering is happening, we get the real gut punch twist. A deeply guilty Morales takes an injured Peck back to his apartment to take care of him. She feels entirely responsible for him getting shot in the kitchen.
Which she shouldn't.
Right, but she puts him to bed. He's heavily drugged up on prescription painkillers, and as she's adjusting his shirt, she notices a massive, deep purple bruise on his shoulder.
A bruise that tells a very specific forensic story.
Yes, because as you pointed out, he took a handgun bullet to the side, but this shoulder bruise...
That kind of deep tissue contusion is entirely consistent with the heavy, repeated recoil from firing high-powered military-grade sniper rifles. It is absolutely not the kind of bruising you get from a 9mm handgun and a quick kitchen scuffle.
Yeah.
It requires sustained, heavy-caliber fire.
Exactly. And while he's heavily medicated, he mumbles something incoherent about missions before passing out completely. So Morales, trusting her gut and realizing the math isn't adding up, cracks open his encrypted laptop while he's unconscious. I absolutely live for the toxic snooping. I was cheering for her on my couch. Open the laptop, girl. Violate his privacy for the greater good.
And what she finds completely shatters the entire structural dynamic of the task force.
She finds hard, undeniable digital proof that Peck, sweet, shy, fumbling, fluty desk nerd Peck, was an active part of the heavily armed hit squad that ambushed the convoy and killed Noah Cyrus on Lazarus's direct orders.
If we connect the tactical dots, it reveals a brilliant, multi-layered defensive strategy by Lazarus. She is playing an entirely different game. She deliberately set up her apartment as a sterile decoy. She knew Shane was testing her with the dinner invitation. She allowed Bex and Hassani to snoop, knowing they would find nothing, effectively throwing them off her scent and making them think she was clean. But simultaneously, she had Peck embedded deep inside their team from day one.
Right under their noses.
He was acting as her secret assassin, her eyes and her ears. It's 4D chess, and the team was barely playing checkers. The psychological compartmentalization required for Peck to maintain that facade, to flirt with Morales, to act terrified of fieldwork, to take a bullet for her to maintain his cover, all while actively betraying them, is sociopathic.
It is so devastating, the betrayal. The sheer manipulation of Morales' feelings, which perfectly sets up the absolute emotional and physical devastation of episode 12. Nancy Albright.
Oh, this episode. This was not just a procedural hunt. This was a descent into the deepest, darkest, most ethically bankrupt parts of the Pit's medical legacy.
Babes. Jamie Chung. I need to take a full minute to obsess over Jamie Chung's performance in this episode. She plays Nancy Albright, and she is seductive, she's glamorous, she is magnetic, and she is terrifyingly, profoundly cold-blooded.
It's a huge departure from the typical killers we see in this universe. Dylan was driven by complex childhood trauma and dissociative projection. Nancy isn't driven by a grand delusion. She is fundamentally a deeply depraved, sadistic person in desperate need of a physiological high. Her original MO before she was captured was chilling in its simplicity.
She would go to upscale bars, pick up wealthy men, seduce them, go back to their hotel rooms, and encourage them to use hard drugs, sometimes for the first time in their lives. She would get them completely incapacitated, and then she would strangle them with a high-end belt while they were physically vulnerable, just to rob them. Her body count was 13. It is so predatory and gross. She weaponized their own vices against them.
She was a thrill killer who used addiction as a murder weapon. But then she was captured and sent to the pit. And this is where we need to unpack the medical malfeasance, because this is the thematic core of the entire episode.
I am going to go on a passionate rant here because my blood is boiling. The institution of the pit, the doctors running it, are actually far more evil and dangerous than the inmates they locked up. Dr. Moody, this absolute hack of a medical professional, decides to treat Nancy's addiction. But does he give her cognitive behavioral therapy? Does he work on her underlying trauma? Does he put her in a structured rehab program?
No, because that takes time, empathy, and actual medical care. The pit doesn't do care. They do control.
Exactly. He gives her an experimental, highly volatile drug called MCOM plus death, entirely without her informed consent. And this drug permanently, irreversibly blocks the dopamine receptors in her brain from feeling the high of any narcotics. They thought they were curing her addiction with a chemical sledgehammer.
We really need to sarcastically applaud the stellar medical ethics of the pit here. Let's break down the sheer blinding hubris of these doctors. They looked at a complex web of psychological trauma, physical addiction, intertwined with sadistic homicidal tendencies, and thought, we can fix this entire pathology by just blocking a chemical receptor. They genuinely believed they could play God with human brain chemistry. They treated her like a lab rat in a maze.
They didn't cure her, they just broke her brain.
Precisely. They didn't cure the addiction, they just blocked the physiological reward system. Which means the psychological craving, the screaming, desperate need for the drug never stopped. They took away the release valve, but left the pressure cooker running.
Injecting her with MCAM plus without actual therapy is like putting a titanium cap on an active volcano without doing anything to relieve the tectonic pressure beneath it. The lava, the addiction doesn't just magically disappear, it just finds a much more explosive, violent, unpredictable way to break the surface. It drove her completely insane. It made her infinitely more desperate and hyper-focused on murder to fill the void. They didn't fix a serial killer. They upgraded her into an unstoppable supervillain.
And we see the horrifying mutated result of that medical hubris in her new MO after she escapes the explosion of the pit. She has evolved. She disguises herself as an NA sponsor, which is deeply, fundamentally sinister.
It is the ultimate violation of a safe space.
She goes into recovery meetings, infiltrating a space built on extreme vulnerability and trust. And she preys on the most fragile people trying to rebuild their lives, like that poor girl Leela. She creates this fake, deeply supportive maternal persona to isolate them.
It's so sick. But the twist, oh my God, the twist of how she actually achieves her high now is pure, unadulterated body horror. It's literally a modern vampire storyline.
Because she cannot get high directly anymore due to the MCAM plus blocking her receptors, her brain forces her to find a horrifying parasitic loophole.
Wait, I need you to explain the theoretical biology of this to me. Because if MCAM plus completely blocks her dopamine receptors, how is she physically capable of feeling a secondhand high from someone else's blood? Wouldn't the blocker just negate the secondhand drugs too?
It's a brilliant question. Let's theorize how this nightmare actually works in the context of the show's universe. MCAM Plus likely acts as a competitive inhibitor, specifically designed to block direct synthetic drug molecules from binding to her receptors. But when she forces lethal amounts of drugs into her victims' systems, their bodies react. They flood with endogenous chemicals, massive spikes of pure adrenaline, terror-induced endorphins, and fully metabolized neurotransmitters that the victim's brain produces in response to the overdose. So when she hooks up an IV and gives herself a direct, literal blood transfusion from them, she isn't just taking the synthetic drug. She is stealing a cocktail of human life force, terror, and metabolized neurochemicals that bypass the specific synthetic block of the MCAM Plus care. It is the sheer psychological and biological rush of stealing another human's biological high. It's a workaround born of pure desperation.
I was screaming at the television. She steals their drug-laced, terror-filled blood to catch a secondhand high. It is utterly depraved. It is twisted. It is the most viscerally disgusting, invasive thing I've seen on this show.
It is literal vampirism, but grounded in medical trauma, addiction, and institutional failure. She's become a parasite. But what's fascinating from a narrative standpoint is how the show brilliantly balances this incredibly dark, heavy, suffocating horror with some genuinely funny, grounded procedural moments.
Yes. We have to talk about the interaction with Zebra, the street-smart drug dealer. The tension is so high, the team is desperately trying to track down where Nancy is getting her massive supply of lethal narcotics to pump into her victims, and they realize they have to send someone undercover to talk to this specific dealer.
And they operate like a highly trained federal task force by literally playing rock, paper, scissors to decide who has to go out into the cold and do it.
And Shane loses. Shane, playing a strung-out drug addict, was comedy gold. He's this highly trained, rigidly postured, square-jawed military guy trying to force street slang, and he gets absolutely hustled by Zebra for a single slice of pizza.
Zebra sees right through in about 4 seconds.
Zebra was so incredibly proud of himself when he ended up being the one to explain the blood transfusion trick to the team. He's just standing there, eating his heavily negotiated pizza, casually dropping advanced forensic biology and street-level pathology knowledge on federal agents. It was the exact breath of levity we desperately needed to survive the heavy themes of this episode.
But the writers are smart. That levity is immediately undercut. They give you a laugh, and then they drop you right into the emotional core of the episode, which centers entirely on grief, loss, and the devastating nature of betrayal. The quiet conversations in the car during the stakeout were some of the best, most nuanced character work the show has executed this entire season.
I got very emotional watching it. I really did. Shane is sitting in that car, and he is completely, fundamentally heartbroken. The walls have finally come down. He's finally realizing, truly internalizing, that his biological mother, Lazarus, is pure evil. He wanted so badly to believe there was some sliver of good in her, that she was just misunderstood or following orders from a higher command. But seeing the horrific, mutated results of her experiments in the pit, seeing what she allowed Dr. Moody to do to Nancy, it breaks him.
It raises a deeply important, universal question about the nature of family, expectation, and biological loyalty. Shane's grief is incredibly complex. It's ambiguous loss. He isn't grieving a mother he actually had. He's mourning the idea of a mother, the fantasy of a woman he desperately hoped was a good person who was forced to give him up. And then you contrast that complicated, toxic grief with Hassani in the exact same scene.
Oh, Hassani finally opening up about his wife.
Right. Hassani sees Shane spiraling, and he reaches out. He bonds with Shane over this profound feeling of loss. Hassani finally explains the mechanism of his own grief, why he still wears his wedding ring years after his wife's death. His grief is pure. It's over a lost, genuine, reciprocated love. It's a clean wound, even if it's incredibly deep. Shane's wound, however, is infected. It's infected by betrayal, manipulation, and the horrifying reality of his genetics.
But the fact that two men with such vastly different sources of trauma can sit in a dark car and share that pain, that vulnerability, that is what makes the team dynamic so compelling. It's the found family trope executed flawlessly. These found family moments are what elevate the show from a simple procedural to actual prestige drama. They are deeply trauma bonded, but they actively choose to support each other, which frankly they are going to need because the climax of this episode shatters that family entirely.
The interrogation scene, the confrontation with Peck, the moment the veil drops.
They finally corner him. Morales has the laptop evidence and they bring him in. And Peck drops the shy, fumbling, nervous nerd act completely. His posture changes, his voice changes, he is cold, he's calculated, and he's incredibly mean. He looks Bex dead in the eye and literally throws Oliver's death in her face. Oliver died bleeding out in Bex's arms during that convoy ambush, an ambush that we now know Peck orchestrated.
It was a brutal, highly effective psychological tactic designed to throw the team off balance. He hits them where it hurts most to maintain control of the interrogation. But it also reveals Peck's true, unvarnished loyalty. He isn't sorry. He doesn't feel guilt. He genuinely believes in Lazarus's mission. And then he drops the massive world-building bomb that ties the entire scattered season together. He reveals that Lazarus isn't just running things. She isn't just a bureaucrat trying to cover up the pit's existence from the public.
She is building an army.
A secret, fully weaponized army of graduated serial killers prepared for active field deployment. The show flashes to a secret high-tech lab, and who do we see standing there, compliant and ready? Dr. Ezekiel Malik, the brilliant sociopath who stopped Bex's heart earlier this season, and Amanda Weiss.
Literal walking monsters.
The entire season, all the chaotic, seemingly random escapes have been leading to this precise revelation. The killers aren't just escaping into the wind to hide. They're being evaluated, selected, and drafted. Lazarus is taking the most lethal, sociopathic, highly skilled assets from the ashes of the pit and turning them into a Black Ops military unit.
It is terrifying. It changes the entire paradigm and the stakes of the show. We aren't just hunting disorganized fugitives anymore. Our little trauma-bonded task force is going to outright war with a shadow government of weaponized serial killers. I cannot wait for the finale. My nervous system is fully engaged. Okay, babes, we need to process all of this tactical and emotional data with our segments. Let's get into segment 1. Trust them or track them.
The premise here is simple. Based on the complex behaviors exhibited in this week's episodes, would you trust this specific character with your life, or are you secretly tracking their every move to prevent a catastrophe? Who is your pick?
My pick is, without a single shred of doubt, Jennifer Morales. I choose absolute, unwavering trust in Morales. She is the undisputed MVP of the week. She followed her intuition. When things felt tactically and emotionally weird with Peck, when she saw the bruise that didn't match the story, she didn't just ignore it. She didn't make excuses for a guy she clearly had a crush on. She did the toxic snooping, she cracked the encrypted laptop, and she found the hard truth. She prioritized the safety of the team over a potential romance. I trust her with my life, my bank account, routing numbers, my passwords, everything. She's solid.
A very solid, defensible choice. She proved her ultimate loyalty to the truth. My pick, however, is on the exact opposite end of the ethical spectrum. I am picking Jonathan Peck, and I am tracking him. In fact, tracking him isn't enough. I would have Apple AirTags surgically sewn into the lining of every single piece of his clothing. I would inject a microchip into his neck like a stray dog. Yes.
Chip him immediately.
Ship him immediately. You fundamentally cannot trust a man who can successfully play the shy, fumbling, flirty desk nerd while simultaneously running wet work assassinations for the main villain. The duality required for that is chilling. He looked Morales in the eye, took a bullet for her to solidify his cover, and was simultaneously the logistical reason Oliver is dead in the ground. The level of cognitive dissonance and emotional suppression required to maintain that dual life means he is capable of lying to anyone about absolutely anything without a spike in his heart rate. Track him to the ends of the earth.
I am so aligned with you. Apple AirTags, in the shoes, in the jacket, in the coffee mug, everywhere. Okay, segment 2. This was a choice. We highlight the most questionable, baffling decision of the episode and clinically unpacked why it was made. And I think we both know exactly what institutional failure we need to highlight here.
The pit doctors injecting Nancy Albright with the experimental drug MCAM plus entirely without her consent.
It was a monumental choice, and it was the wrong choice.
It was a choice born of pure, unfiltered, God-complex arrogance. We have to unpack the sheer hubris of these institutional doctors. They looked at a patient with a deeply complex psychological and physiological addiction, fatally intertwined with homicidal tendencies, and thought, we can fix this nuanced trauma with a chemical blockade. They believed they could outsmart brain chemistry with a sledgehammer.
They didn't see her as a human patient who needed psychiatric care. They saw her as a petri dish for their pharmacological experiments.
Exactly. They prioritized compliance and containment over actual rehabilitation. And the mechanism of that choice, the consequence, they didn't neutralize a threat. By ignoring the psychological component of her addiction and only attacking the physical receptors, they amplified the threat exponentially. They created a supervillain who hunts vulnerable people for their blood. They took away the substance but left the hunger, effectively making her infinitely more dangerous and unpredictable to the general public. It was a complete abandonment of the Hippocratic Oath, masquerading as cutting-edge medical science.
It makes my blood boil just thinking about the arrogance of it. The pit is the real villain of this narrative. Okay, moving on to segment 3, energy check. Off or on? Whose energy felt completely misaligned and off this week, and who is actually stepping up and on their game? I'll go first. Energy is completely O-off-F for Jeff Miller, Jeff Dunham's character.
The intellectual property thief.
The thief. Let's examine the energy here. How do you steal another man's highly specific, deeply personal ventriloquist act, build an entire lucrative comedy career off mocking his trauma, assume he's dead without ever verifying it, and then act completely shocked, literally weeping and begging for your life on your living room floor when he predictably shows up with a loaded gun and a wooden dummy to reclaim what is his? The energy is weak. The energy is guilty. Take some accountability for your theft, Jeff.
The sheer lack of due diligence on his part was staggering. You'd think a simple background check or a Google search would be standard operating procedure before legally trademarking a serial killer's material.
Yeah.
My pick for energy, being undeniably on-N, however, goes to Ben Jones.
Oh, sweet, reliable Ben.
Unsung hero energy of the highest order. Let's look at his role. He is a tech guy. He belongs behind a keyboard in a climate-controlled room. But he gets dragged into a highly volatile, unpredictable field shootout with an armed serial killer in a confined kitchen space. And what does he do? He doesn't panic. He doesn't freeze or drop his weapon. He draws his sidearm. He provides immediate covering fire. He secures the perimeter, and he manages the crime scene while Morales stops Peck from bleeding out. He was entirely on his game. He stepped up when the chaos breached the walls.
Competence is the most attractive trait a character can have.
Oh.
We love Ben Jones. Okay, final segment. Segment 4, say it with your chest. What's something someone should have said directly in these episodes but didn't? I am going to step into Shane's shoes regarding Lazarus for this one because the boy is far too emotionally repressed and polite and I need to say it for him. Loudly and dramatically. Are you ready for this?
The floor is completely yours. Let the repression out.
You are not my mother. You are a biological accident and a science experiment gone catastrophically wrong. You are a sociopath in a military uniform, playing dress-up with human lives, and I am officially, permanently done trying to find a fractured soul inside you. There is nothing there. You are empty, your cause is empty, and I am finally free of your manipulation.
That was incredibly cathartic. I felt that in my bones. Shane desperately needed to deliver that exact monologue instead of just internalizing his heartbreak in the passenger seat of a car.
Right. Just say it with your chest, Shane. Stop hoping for a maternal hug from a woman who actively weaponizes serial killers for shadow governments.
It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing your genetics trace back to a monster. But he needs to sever that emotional umbilical cord if he's going to survive the finale.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, I need a deep foundational sip of my drink after expelling that energy.
Take a sip. You have more than earned it.
Babes, look at our glasses. The ice is melting in the Aperol spritzes. We have yelled. We have unpacked the mechanisms of trauma. We've spiraled about institutional hubris, taking that final, watery, but deeply satisfying sip. It feels like the analytical pressure valve has been released. We can finally ease into the weekend. The chaos of the week is officially behind us.
We've purged the procedural trauma from our systems. We have analyzed the unanalyzable. We are ready for rest.
We really are. We want to express our most genuine, heartfelt gratitude to you, the Snark Squad. Thank you for listening to us spiral, for dealing with our technical chaos on the channel, for leaving the funniest, most unbinged, deeply analytical comments, and just for being the absolute best, most engaged community on the internet. We would literally just be two healthcare professionals yelling at a sterile wall if it weren't for you validating our theories.
You validate our most complex delusions, and we appreciate it more than you know.
Please remember to hit that subscribe button, rate this show 5 stars, because anything less is a statistical anomaly we refuse to acknowledge, and share this recording with a messy friend who needs to understand the lore of the hunting party before the massive finale drops next week.
But before we sign off, we absolutely cannot leave you without something monumental to chew on. Something to keep your brain firing tonight.
Oh, lay the theory on them. Drop the bomb.
Think about the underlying architecture of this entire narrative. If Lazarus is currently weaponizing serial killers for a black ops army, and we know from the files that she was the very first successful graduate of the pit, and we know Shane was physically born inside the pit to Lazarus before he was adopted out.
I'm getting chills. I know where you're going with this.
What if Shane isn't just a regular cop who tragically happens to be a sociopath's son? What if Shane's entire life, his specific adoption placement, his military career trajectory, his highly suspicious placement on this exact task force hunting his mother, what if all of it is part of a decades-long, deeply embedded psychological experiment orchestrated by the pit? What if Shane is actually the ultimate weapon, a sleeper agent raised in the light to eventually serve the dark, and he doesn't even know it yet?
Babes, my mind is completely broken. My jaw is on the floor. That is the most toxic, mind-bending, devastating theory I have ever heard, and I am entirely obsessed with the tactical implications of it. We are going to be spiraling about that specific mechanism all weekend.
Sleep well, Snark Squad. Keep one eye open.
Stay sipping, stay messy, and we'll see you on the Snark side.